evening.
Welcome.
Thank you. So, October 5th and 6th, our goal is to host the Relay for Sports. We held at the athletic complex, start at 6 p.m. and run until 6 a.m. My guess is at this point we'll have an excess of 200 students from the middle school and the high school. We hosted this event 2 years ago. It was wildly successful, with lots of activities going on throughout the week.
And lots of coffee.
The volunteers drink lots of coffee. The kids eat lots of hot dogs.
Kids don't need it. Kids don't need it.
No, kids don't eat it. They'll keep us awake not all. We will be awake all night. There'll be a lot of chaperones there. Once kids are there, they can't leave. Pretty much locked in. We have something you have to eat all night long. The police came by several times 2 years ago just to check on things, make sure everything was running smoothly. Lights would stay on all night long. Music will be very low. We had no issues 2 years ago, with the exception of some extremely drunk neighbors who showed up about 1 o'clock in the morning and asked us to leave. Other than that, it was okay.
So there's two items on here. One is for the outdoor sound permit, and the other is the extension of the use of the lights.
Yes.
Past, currently, you can use the lights until what time?
I have no idea. I'm under the impression of 11 o'clock, but I think people are renting the field, rent it now till 10 or 10:30. So I'm under the impression it's 11 o'clock.
I think it's 11 lights.
Okay.
We have a packet before us that spells out the event rules, the times, a general description, the registration forms and so forth. Does anybody have any questions on the council?
I do.
Mr. Zawinski?
Mr. Nangle, that's on school property, correct? I know it's town property, but it's considered school property.
I believe so, yes.
So has it been cleared with the school committee? Are they all on board with this?
They are on board with it.
Okay.
Question for Mr. Nangle? Please.
I assume that the sound system will be directed towards the field and away from the neighbors' houses,
Yes.
like it was 2 years ago.
It will be, and what we will do is every hour or so, we'll have somebody drive throughout the neighborhoods to listen make sure, because as the wind blows, the sound changes. So we will make certain that there are no issues there. The usual individuals who have a problem with the sound had no issues with it 2 years ago. And that's primarily on behind the track, not on Providence Pike, so Green River.
Mr. President, make a motion to approve the sound system for the outdoor sound system permit.
Did you want to do two separate? Motion by Mr. Yazbak regarding the sound permit. Seconded by Mr. McGee. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll ask for a roll call vote.
Mr. McGee?
Yes.
Mr. Yazbek?
Yes.
Mr. Zalinski?
Yes.
Mr. Flaherty?
Yes. Motion carries.
Mr. President,
Mr. Yazbak.
make a motion for the extension of the use of the outdoor lights for the evening.
Motion by Mr. Yazbak to extend the lights beyond the current time. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. McGee. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll do this to, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Congratulations.
Thank you.
A lot of luck in the event.
Appreciate it.
Do you have a goal, a fundraising goal?
My guess is somewhere in the neighborhood of $2,000. And once they get there, everything is free, so it'll be approximately $2,000.
Thank you very much.
Anybody, if any of you want to show up, take
But-
us at 2 o'clock in the
But
morning.
do we have to stay till 6? I read that.
We'll let you come in and out as
Oh,
often as you like.
I'll be there at 5 in the morning.
That's a better chance of
Better
that.
chance of that.
It'll be a sunrise contest. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill.
And I know we also have some folks that are waiting, and I would just ask if there's any objection to moving up another item, which is under new business D, discussion by council vote or other action on right-hand conservation easement for approximately 40 acres, plat 21, lot 418, contingent upon subdivision approval and purchased by the town. Any objections? No. Okay. So I would ask Mr. Erickson to step forward and describe what this item is about that's being sought, or is shown me from the land trust.
I just want to point out, and then I'll turn it over to Curly, that when the Department of Environmental Management gives an amount of money to acquire land, in this case $400,000, they require a standard conservation easement, which can be modified slightly, as Curly will talk about. But there are limits to what can be changed. I am a little bit taken aback by the fact that in the negotiation with all the parties in this, that nobody contacted the Department of Environmental Management. So Carolee and I took this up. I want to point out two areas that you may have noticed that may be of concern. On page 5, under 5.1, costs of enforcement. Any costs incurred by grantee enforcing the terms of conservation easement against grantor shall essentially be paid by the grantor. This has never happened in the history of them dealing with these easements. They have had cases where there was encroachment. I was very concerned about the 2.54 acres with a private party, grading in such a way as that you had runoff onto the conservation easement land. In all cases, they've been able to negotiate without having to go to this option, but you can see why it's necessary, particularly when you have town-owned land that could have an impact on the conservation easement area. The other one is on number 7, page 7, number 10, condemnation. If the premises is taken in whole or in part by exercise of the power of eminent domain, a grantee shall be entitled to 50% of any such condemnation award paid to the grantor. That was put in there to discourage conversion. Eminent domain is one way of getting out of this process, just about the only way. Once you have a conservation easement, it's protection forever. And the concept there was that suppose you paid $925,000 and you later had a settlement under eminent domain for $700,000. In that case, 50% goes to DEM. On the other hand, if you paid $1.2 million, if you got $1.2 million for it, then half would go to DEM. It's not capped because sometimes they win, sometimes you lose, and this is not something that happens in real life. Conservation is for all time. If there are no questions about that, I will turn it over to Carolee, and she will explain the management plan and the other things that have to go on with it. We do have a checklist. We've already filled out the W-9 form. There's a simple form for saying that the town council gave you authority to sign in the case of the town administrator. And basically the bottom line is this is the standard form that gets the money.
Question before we move
Yeah.
on. So I know that Mr. Nato has been handling the negotiations with the seller, and of course he reports to our solicitor.
And with DV Win.
Pardon me?
And with DV Win.
And with DV Win. My question is, has there been any discussion with Mr. Nato about this, and could we brief on that?
Sure, I spoke to Mr. Nato today. He said this is a standard, I should say, he sent me an email, I believe it was. He said that this is standard, in that he had one concern, but it wasn't with the easement itself.
Okay.
I reviewed it, and I brought my information to Bob, and Bob actually discussed it earlier, so he answered my questions.
Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Erickson, based on what we've heard so far?
So is it safe to say that this document's been reviewed by you as a solicitor and Mr. Nato?
Yes.
Okay, that's all I need for the record. Mr. Erickson, getting back to paragraph 10 on page 7, why wouldn't that end in a period of time, and that's going to go on in perpetuity, who would take it under eminent domain anyways? If it's not, and it wouldn't be us, we're not going to take our own land, but
Right.
it would have to be the state or somebody like that?
State or federal government, that's the only imaginable. I don't think it's ever been done, but that's the only imaginable situation.
High-speed rail.
Yeah, I know, but, so I think there should be an exclusion in there that says, other than by state or federal government. Only because, we can't tell the federal government what to do, nobody can, and God knows the state would probably take it in Hendersonville, with all due respect to the lady who was just here.
No, once the state approves your comprehensive plan, they have to respect your comprehensive plan. And if you said that that's not eligible for anything, then they have to respect that. But who knows what's going to happen 20 years down the line?
Maybe they find gold.
Gravel, fine gas.
Oil, gas. But it makes sense, this clause, because we want to prevent the conversion of the property to open space. And the state is paying the lion's share of this, so I don't have a problem with section 4 at all.
Michelle?
Yeah, so thank you very much for putting this on the agenda at fairly short notice. As Bob said, we met with both the appraiser and Lisa and spent about almost 2 hours there to go over the whole thing. I did send the checklist. I have another copy of the checklist I'll bring forward, so just see where we are. Tonight, I hope that you would make the motion to vote and approve the conservation easement, and then hold it according to DEM. You can, in that motion, make a motion to hold an escrow until the authority to release the conservation easement. And the reason is there's a timing crisis from DEM, so she has to get the conservation easement in hand, the signed easement in hand by October 10th. And then she has to send it to DEM attorneys. By October 15th, the easement has to go to some other board. Did you get the name of that other board? There's some other state
It's a state
board.
purchasing board.
It has to go to some other board, which can take 2 weeks for that process. And we need to close this whole deal. She can't issue the check. We need to close the whole deal by the end of October. But she's totally fine with you making the motion to sign the easement, and then they would hold the easement, they would move the easement along the process, but it wouldn't be actually officially duly recorded and started until all the paperwork and the appeal periods through the subdivision regulations, and we're closer to closing. Is that
Well, so
clear?
if I understand correctly, we could vote to authorize executing this upon the subdivision of the property, right? You mentioned something about escrow. I'm not sure that I.
Because the execution of the subdivision property won't happen until 20 days after the appeal, or you'll have a 20-day appeal period.
Well, you can consider that. I could write the opinion the day after. The appeal period is not an issue for writing a decision. However, what they're saying is that they would hold this in escrow, and the town would not be bound by it until such time as...
DEM would hold it in escrow.
Correct.
Right.
DEM will hold it in escrow, and that's the preferred,
Right.
so she can move this along. It'll be held in escrow at DEM, and it won't be an easement
Right.
until all the subdivision goes through and all of that, and that's what I hope you guys can vote on tonight. Also, she needs to have, and Bob alluded to it, a town council vote to authorize the signing of the conservation easement. So there's a certificate of authority form. And so those two motions, because it's concomitant with the conservation easement, to just authorize the town council to, or authorize Paulette to sign the conservation easement.
You don't need that form. That's actually just the way that they want it presented. And
They just want a sheet of
town,
paper.
the town clerk would attest to the fact that there was an approval vote.
So neither of those two forms, but neither of those two forms need to be completed as long as the conservation easement is executed? These two forms?
The certificate of authority,
Right.
you could hold that plus the conservation easement in escrow, at the, hold it in escrow until the process is completed. So, and then on on the conservation easement, talking to Lisa, and I tried to make it clear what's boilerplate is a boilerplate easement, as Solicitor Lombardi said. What is boilerplate, and I made one addition to give both of us some flexibility there. Her point is that if we make any major changes to this easement, it's going to slow the process down even more. We're already under a tight, very tight time window, so that the more we keep it boilerplate, the better off we are.
Well,
So-
it sounds like, I mean, as far as the conservation easement's concerned, it's been reviewed by both the solicitor and Mr. Nato, and apparently neither of you had any concerns about changing anything there.
Right, I didn't bold, anything that's not bolded is boilerplate from DEM.
Right, the only thing I would say is that if you start making changes to this, then I think it goes away.
Right.
So,
I understand
That's-
And you're not recommending anything.
no,
Right, so that's what I'm saying. So the one change I did make, but just to give both of us, because we're the joint owners, some flexibility, is because of this, and those of you who walked the property that Saturday, you know we may need some grading to start a trail. So on page, let's see where that is. On page 3, item C, it says it's prohibited, these are prohibited uses, any ditching, draining, yada yada, mining, dredging, removal of gravel, as permitted pursuant to the management plan. So in the management plan, we can say we need to grade to provide trail access. So from Lisa's standpoint, this is obviously the legal document. We want to have as much wiggle room as possible, both us and the town, to have things in the management plan that can be changed. That can be changed on a 5-year basis. That has to go in front of the State Historic Commission to change it. But still, it's changeable. Whereas the easement, if we didn't have that in there,
It's
and
recorded.
we tried to grade it, that could be a problem. So that's why I added that one clause, but that's it. Everything else, all the other ones that say as permitted pursuant to the management plan, that's already in the boilerplate language. So that gives you flexibility to address, invasive species if you have to do trail maintenance and improvement, to cut trees down along the trail if you have to, those kinds of things. So this would go with the management plan. I'm working with Carol Ayala from the Land Trust on the management plan. I have a folder this thick of other people's management plans, and we are just slowly wading through it. But it's going to be very straightforward. We also have the National Grid management plan that they provided to us. So we're working with all of those. And the gist is that it's going to be for passive recreation. Ideally, some education, environmental education, open it up to the schools if they want to do it. We don't have any money to provide, interpretive signs along the way, and we don't want to promise that in the management plan because we don't have any money right now to do it. But we would have it available for passive recreation and environmental education. If we get grant money subsequently, then we can add to the environmental education component of it, and then propose a sort of a sequence of events. The first sequence is the trails that exist, to eliminate obstacles on the trails that exist, and then ideally, subsequently, to have a trail that goes all the way around the property. That would be the end goal. For the dragonfly, keep an eye on the number, the population of dragonfly, and try to develop a management plan that manages to maintain that habitat for that species.
Okay, I'd like to bring us back to the easement.
Yep.
And ask if anybody has any other questions about proceeding with authorizing the town administrator to execute the easement agreement.
Mr. President, if I may, just this obviously is something that's going to last forever, and that there are prohibited uses in here, and I just want to make sure everybody was comfortable with those. So,
Are there any ones that you wanted to point out in particular?
I did circle B, the placement or construction of any building, structure, or other improvement. I don't know.
However, it says as may be permitted pursuant to the management plan. So we would have a sign, and if we want to propose a kiosk or something, we can think about wording to add, or a bathroom. after we may subsequently think about language, it gives us some flexibility in that. So we will, once we've finished drafting it from ARPS, we'll pass it to Bob and obviously, share it with the town and work out a mutually acceptable management plan. This is a joint effort, and it's, right now we're trying to summarize, there's a baseline, you can provide a baseline report, and that's sort of a listing of all the species, that have been documented on the property and that kind of thing.
So following the review of the solicitor and Mr. Nato, and on the recommendation of the land trust, is there a motion to authorize the town administrator to execute this agreement?
That's one more question.
Please.
What's the review process for the management plan? If this agreement here is dependent on a management plan, at what point in time and who does adopt the management plan?
So, the way, we've never done this before, we'll work together with the town to produce a joint management plan and then submit that as part of the paperwork on this checklist to DEM. And there could be some give and take between us and the town and DEM, whether they like the writing of the management plan, whether it suffices as a management plan, and then it gets duly recorded as a management plan. Then you have to, we can figure out an appropriate schedule to review the management plan, and every 5 years, we could propose changes to it, to the State Historic Preservation Commission.
When does it actually due the first time around?
It's due before the end of October.
It's part
Right,
of the,
it's due as
part of the closing.
Right, as part of closing. The other thing I did want to mention, just to give you a complete sense of where we are, is we're going to just have the town be issued the check for the $400,000 because it's just simpler. They'll probably do a dummy check for our purposes, for PR purposes, since we wrote the grant. But the check will go directly to the town, and you're signing a W-9 form for the $400,000.
So Carol Lee, are you proposing that the management plan come before the council on either the 7th or the 21st of October for approval?
In other towns, do they have town council approve a management plan?
That's normally not done by the town council.
That's what the email
Basically, it's going to be Lisa Premiano reviewing it and saying, yeah, this is no problem, this will go right through the properties attached to the conservation easement. It's basically about, how you do the trails, how you, protect against the slope degradation within the trail. It's the kind of thing that's entirely consistent with the conservation easement. In other words, if you want to build a kiosk, you have to put it in the management plan. And it's entirely back and forth with Lisa Premiano until such time as she says, yeah, let's go to the property.
There's some things they require in the management plan. For example, they require that you either have signs or you blaze the trees to indicate the property. So what we said is we would have one sign at the entrance, and then the rest of the property would be blazed, flagged or painted trees to mark the property, because that's cheaper, easier to maintain. So those are the kinds of things. I can show you, I have examples of other people's management plans I'm happy to pass around. I'm totally flexible on the process if you want to review the management plan.
I just asked the question, I don't need to see it, but I wasn't sure if other councilors wanted to have, wanted to see that, so.
Is this a done deal? Did you guys
The question is, have we already agreed to purchasing the property?
Yes, at the last meeting.
With a number of contingencies.
Right. You can, please, speak right up.
Yeah, I didn't know, I heard it wasn't approved 100%, and you're saying it was.
The purchase and sales was approved last meeting. But there were some contingencies that needed to be done before.
Because after I walked it, I thought we were gonna talk about it and see what we all thought about it, Obviously, I missed it, so it couldn't be here. But I just thought it was with the ledge and going down, it wasn't a great thing. And I would have liked to negotiate the price a little better than what we did. In my opinion, it wasn't worth it to me. you know? And I just thought, you know, you just kind of jumped the gun. I know you have timelines, but,
Well, we've had 3 appraisals, and actually, I should give you the other piece of information. And one of the reason we met with Lisa was because the appraisal has to be slightly redone, and that's being finished. We should have it tomorrow. We should have the appraisal tomorrow. Because the appraisal, since the land wasn't subdivided, the appraisal was for the 42 and a half acres. The appraisal, obviously, because DEM's only purchasing 40, the appraisal has to be just for that 40. So now Lisa Primiano is seeing the wind turbine map. One other piece that needs to be discussed, and I don't know if on this agenda, since it's not on your agenda, maybe it can be on the next agenda, to give the land trust the easement to the winding road for the wind turbine. Because right now, the way the appraisal, if the town's property was completely carved out the way it's shaped, that seriously impacts it could impact the value of the property. It's still the highest and best use of the property is condos. And so Jenny Flanagan is still going with the condos, and we discussed the right way to do that. And so we will have tomorrow the 40-acre appraisal. But nonetheless, both Scotty's appraisal and the 3 appraisals we have are way above the purchase price, way above the purchase price.
yeah, 3 appraisals, and they all thought it was worth it.
Correct, that's correct.
Well, it's the
Because
same
they
appraisal.
have condominium approval.
Condominium approval in there, and you saw the cliffs, right? So I can't imagine as a builder we'd be able to put a road in there and make that a worthwhile project.
Well, I agree, but that's true for Dowling Village too.
All I saw is ledge and, you know, a lot of wetness, and I'm amazed, you know. In my opinion, I really came out with that, I just wanted to say it. You know,
It's-
if you guys think it's 300, you know, you have 3 appraisers, and
Maybe Bob can fill you in on where the condos are, the status of where the condos are, but they were, the master plans.
It had multi-housing approval, whether it was condos or apartments. So there are a number of different options they could have taken to develop. This did not consider the fact that they could have come in with a comprehensive permit application and presumably gotten far more than 76. So what you do is take the most likely scenario and value that. And just over history, as we've done this, it's coming anywhere between 1.2 and 1.8 million. So obviously, they're going to take a tax deduction for selling at below market value, considerably below market value. And DEM, you know, is understanding of that. All they wanted to do was have something that meant, you know, everything that they needed. One of the issues that our hired solicitor chose to do on his own was to value the 2.54 acres at $1, when it should have been done equitably at $55,000. I had to argue the case for why it didn't make a difference in the larger scheme of things, but it would have been a lot nicer if that had been negotiated directly with DEM before it was presented here.
But just maybe to your comment, DEM rated this second highest score for the state. So even with that ledge, to DEM, it's really valuable. And it's really valuable in part because it's adjacent to the Woonsocket Conservation Area, in part because it protects our water, and in part because it protects these endangered species. So those are the reasons why DEM is rating it so high, and why DEM is willing to pay the development rates for this land, because it has permission, master plan approval for the condos.
Yeah.
I just want the record to show that it's been one appraiser that has updated an appraisal 3 times for different market conditions and in different lapses of time. It's not 3 separate or independent appraisals. It's one appraiser.
True, but Scotty, we're only obligated to do one appraiser, but the seller obviously had their own appraiser, so it's 2 appraisers, and he did 2 appraisals himself, and we've done 4 of this, actually.
And I should also tell you,
So,
Councilman B, because I respect your insight on this, that there was a great deal of internal turmoil among the partners as to whether they should sell at this price. Basically, some of the partners usurping the authority of other partners and finally agreeing to it. So it's been a hard road getting here to get them to sell that price.
Yeah, I'm just looking at, after the walk, I mean, there's nice spots to it, but I'm like, the access was terrible.
The access is terrible.
It's
That's why-
terrible.
That's why we'll have to figure out a grant
You
to
know,
grade
so
it.
that's the first thing that
You're
made
right.
me go, oh my God. Then where we're gonna put the access was kind of wetlands. And then, like, looking over the whole picture, it was all hilly, ledgy rock, and I'm sitting there going, was that ever really gonna be developed? You know, so I'm sitting there saying, I don't know, I wouldn't pay that for it, personally, and I'm just saying my opinion. You know, I can't see if I'm a builder that I want to put condos in there.
I would just like to, I'd just like to just remind us that at the last meeting, the council approved the purchase and sales agreement. What's before us this evening is not whether we proceed in purchasing or not. What's before us this evening is discussion by council vote or action on the Rydam conservation easement for the 40 acres. So I appreciate that, you know, that people have feelings about whether we should or shouldn't, but that train's left the station, and what's before us is the conservation easement.
And the authority to.
The authority for the administrator to sign it.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
I'd just like to add, I understand your point. When I was on vacation in California, I stayed in a $2 million condo on a canyon room that was almost impossible to get to. Far worse than what we have here. But that's the way they like to build because they like the view. So,
Bet you the view is better than Walmart.
no, actually, it's a very distant view of Los Angeles. But,
Was it one condo by itself?
pardon?
Were you at?
No, it was about 300 or 400.
If they build
But the point is
Valley
that,
Village, they can build condos. Is it a hot build? Yeah, Tom, but that's not what's before. What's before
But
is.
That's fine, I just wanted to say my
I
opinion.
walked it too, and I said,
you
well,
know?
this is difficult, but we voted to purchase it. Now we're sitting with $400,000 of conservation easement. We have to approve this, so DEM will hold it in escrow. DEM's gonna look at this management plan. It all comes down to the management plan that's put together, because it's DEM, it's oversight of the management plan. So we're at the position now, we're at the point that I think we have to approve this conservation easement.
It's not, I hope, no buyer's remorse here. It's a
No, I don't have
beautiful
any
piece of
buyer's-
property with the Lowe's and the Walmart notwithstanding. But there's trails, it's connected, it will be a nice place for people to hike, and we don't have enough places for people to hike in North Smithfield.
and the other view is a substantially open space in an urban environment, which is very rare.
Yes. Central Park.
so did we, I'll ask the clerk, did we have a motion? There's been no motion yet.
No,
What I was gonna, what I was prefacing it by saying is that, based on the review of the solicitor and Mr. Nato working for the solicitor and the recommendation of the administration and the land trust, with that, I would entertain a motion for approval of the authorization for the administrator to execute the conservation easement.
So we're ready. Do you want to do the, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mr. Lombardi.
Please.
Okay. Check this is what I'm going to be building this road. And then finish up with that. Yeah, I was actually going to take it off there and include this road. That's fine, that's the way it is. Want a motion?
Please.
Mr. President, make a motion to approve in substantial form the conservation easement for the town administrator, signature until released by the Rhode Island Department, excuse me, to be held in escrow until released by, I screwed up, Jim. Oh, I'm sorry. Jim?
Yeah.
This arrow, where's this arrow going to? Thank you. All right, Mr. President, take two. I'd like to make a motion. Three. Is it three? I was counting. This one I'm going to hit out of the park, though. Okay, 3 swings? Okay. Motion to approve in substantial form the conservation easement for the town administrator's signature. Okay, where's this arrow? Help me out there. Until, signature. Oh, to be held in escrow by the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management until released by administrator. Madam Clerk, so help me God. Madam Clerk, do you have that?
I do, actually.
Do you? God, you can't make motions. That's the motion.
Motion by Mr. Zelinski. Is there a second? I will second it. Is there any discussion? I would like to just also take this opportunity to thank an outgoing member of the Conservation Commission after her 10 years of service, Ruth Pacheco. Thank you very much. We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, I'd ask for a roll call vote.
Mr. McGee.
Yes.
Mr. Yazbek.
No.
Mr. Swansky.
Yes.
Mr. Flaherty.
Yes, motion carries. Back to the agenda where we left off. We're at agenda item number 6, proposed zoning ordinance amendment regarding section 17, site plan review. This is listed on the agenda for both a public hearing and discussion by council, vote, or other action on second reading. And I just wanted to very quickly preface this. Section 17 has been before this council since, I believe, since March, and in an attempt to correct what I believe was an error back in 2006, and the then council thought that they were enacting section 17, but in fact they were only voting on the subsidiary motions and not the final motion. And so it was never officially codified in zoning, and now we're back to do it.
Yes, and I would also like to add that it was assumed by the previous planner to have been approved, basically on the comment of the previous town council president that we're all done. So it appeared in the zoning book, the published zoning book, for years, as if it were actually, had been passed. And many of the decisions made by the planning board were based on that section, as well as section 5.5.3, which was also not passed at the same time. The public hearings were held together, which is never a good idea, and the confusion went back to 5.5.3, and that's the one that excludes wetlands and slopes from calculation for minimum required area for a lot. So this has a very unusual history, and about a year and a half ago, I found out that 17 had never been approved while I was working with the town clerk on codification going forward. And then subsequently, about a year ago or 8 months ago, I found that 5.5.3 had never been approved either. And went to the previous town solicitor, discussed it, and we covered the whole territory, and we agreed completely that that was the case. So what I did here was take the part that was codified, put it in black, and the part that was assumed to have been passed, put it in red, and we went through with the planning board, consistent with the comp plan and any additional recommendations. There was only one proposed recommendation to deal with, there are a series of should clauses about building on ridge lines. And it was proposed by the chairman that we not include that language to discourage building on the ridge lines, and it failed 3-2 in the planning board, so there are no official additional recommendations under the local ordinance going forward. Now, I also went through and discussed with the planning board and with the town council the issue of shall and should. There's a further issue here, and that sometimes a shall, which is mandatory, can be further undermined by words like shall consider. So you just say, well, we considered it. There's no report required, so did you consider that? It's a requirement. Yeah, we considered it. And that's how you write, that's how some towns write comprehensive plans. We are a little more explicit about what we're going to do. And then the question arises, for one of the tempered shalls on page 17.6, which we have not previously addressed, but which John Mark Antonio and their general counsel have brought to the fore. It's 17.8.1, should be on page 17-6, site planning, and it begins to the maximum extent practical. And that is an underminer of a shall. It says that, you know, if you can't do it, you don't have to do it. So that, unfortunately, is 2 paragraphs removed from a list on page 17-7 of the following specific areas shall be preserved as undeveloped open space or lot area in accordance with the applicable federal, state, and town regulations and orders. Now, the main issue here is the fact that it lists undeveloped open space, but it also says or lot area, okay, which means that you don't happen to put the buildings on that section of the property. You can still count it as minimum, toward minimum lot acreage. And the state bill, the so-called Slopes Act, addressed only the issue of removing it from the minimum calculation. And under our old assumed 5.5.3, they would do the whole shading for the areas that were 15% or more, or maybe 20% or more, and exclude those. I recently ran across a subdivision that would have been excluded, slightly excluded, and since it didn't apply, it was a legitimate subdivision. Okay, the list is interesting because not all of them should really apply to the maximum extent practical. Water resources, including freshwater wetlands and community wellheads. We already protect those with our existing ordinance. Aquifers and high-value recreation waters, and we don't protect high-value recreation waters, and these tend to be the ones that wind up being non-compliant, under state MS4, because they tend to slope down toward the shoreline, and everything slides down into the water. And then 3, significant trees or stands of trees. That is not quantified, but there could be, the planning board actually has required stands of trees to be preserved along with historic stone walls under this clause. Habitats in 5 for rare, threatened, and endangered flora and fauna. Obviously, we want to do that to the maximum extent possible. Historically significant structures or sites. Unfortunately, we don't have a definition for that, and it would probably be only something that was either under the local or federal historic district. 7C vistas. Obviously, you want to preserve them if you can, but it's a very subjective concept. And then number 8, prime agricultural soils. The rest of that is again very subjective. USDA has their list of prime agricultural soils, and that should be defined in the process. Now, that is one. I only want to deal with one other thing that was in any way controversial, and that was near the end. It was in regard to a discussion of where the planning board and zoning give specific waivers and
1734.
1734, I'm sorry. Okay, so the blue. The planning board may grant waivers to the application of design standards in Article 5 of the Land Development and Subdivision Regulations, but may not grant waivers that are contrary to required standards contained in this zoning ordinance. What that means is, if the subdivision regulations say the applicant shall follow section whatever of the zoning ordinance, you can't grant that as a waiver. If it was simply purely only in the subdivision regulations, you could grant that as a waiver. But this is, when it's backlinked to the zoning ordinance, you're essentially granting a variance. And I say this because the planning board has done it before I came here. And I've had to, where the decision was missing, I've had to write in and explain. Fortunately, it was a waiver that wasn't necessary. But, you know, that's how confusing it gets. So you really don't have to worry about the zoning board, because they have the option to grant variances, either dimensional or use variances, but it's the planning board that's going to get you into trouble. Having said that, we just had the zoning board grant a subdivision, but you can head up after the fact. All right, so any questions about that one?
I have an overall question. I noticed on the very front, the legend at the very top says red for zoning book text, blacks for Unicode text.
Yes.
But the issue of this not having been codified, is it actually in Unicode?
Yes,
It is.
the old parts of it are in there, so that's in black. The parts that were supposedly passed in 2006,
We're red.
but not codified, are in red.
Okay.
And then the town council asked for changes that were very specific and obvious, so I put those in blue. But I also said I would deal with that section on 17-34, and I wound up doing it, once I read it 2 or 3 times, I realized the way to do it was not the way we intended originally, because the zoning board really doesn't have a problem here, it's the planning board that has to be warned. And you cannot warn the zoning board not to allow variances, okay? There's case law on that, it's very explicit. If your zoning says you can't give a variance in this, you can't. Because you can give a variance on anything that happens to be in the zoning ordinance.
So are you going to be proposing alternate language then for page 1734?
I did.
Oh, that is,
1734. But the alternate language for 17-7 is something you should discuss, and I would suggest that you continue the second reading, beyond tonight, so that we can work out an acceptable arrangement here. If you want to read into the record,
I did
and I will comment on it.
communicate with John Marcantonio today, and he told me that we'd all be receiving a letter from their general counsel, which I told him in a follow-up email that I would read it into the public record. This is a public hearing. So it's dated,
Mr. President,
yes,
if I may, is this what you're referring to?
correct.
Could you, I was told this arrived at 3:30 today, so just make the notation of the date and time.
Correct. This did arrive by fax today. I can't quite tell exactly what time, but it was this afternoon. It's dated September 16th. Regarding proposed amendment to section 17 of the zoning ordinance. Dear honorable members of the town council, please be advised that I am general counsel to the Rhode Island Villagers Association. The association is concerned with the proposed amendments to section 17 site plan review of the town of North Smithfield's zoning ordinance. Although there are multiple proposed provisions of concern to the association, one provision which has caused immediate and grave concern is found under section 17.8.1 site planning. It mandates that all, quote, steep slopes above 15% are measured over a 10-foot interval, end quote, shall be preserved as undeveloped open space. In its last legislative session, the Rhode Island General Assembly passed a law that prohibits a municipality from subtracting area of land attributable to a slope when calculating the minimum lot area or number of buildable lots or units. The state legislature recognized that development can take place on slopes when it is in accordance with other applicable ordinances or codes. The town of North Smithfield's automatic removal of what it refers to as, quote, steep slopes from developable land is contrary to the legislative intent of the aforementioned bill. In addition, it raises an overarching question of the constitutionality of automatically removing certain sloped land from an owner and forcing it to remain undeveloped. Similar issues relate to the town's proposed amendments, for example, to take, quote, significant trees and, quote, scenic vistas from an owner and classify them as undevelopable in the name of preserved open space. Therefore, the Rhode Island Builders Association respectfully requests that the town not pass or adopt the proposed amendments as written to Section 17 of the zoning ordinance. Thank you for your thoughtful consideration of this request. Very truly yours, Christine Augustian, who's the legal counsel for the Builders Association. I think what we heard from you, Bob, is that some of the concerns that were raised here may not be what they interpret them to be.
Yes, I would simply say again that although it starts as undeveloped open space, then it says or lot area, it's a different issue altogether as to whether you have to exclude them from your minimum lot size or whether you should take the term maximum extent practical to leave that as the portion of the land that doesn't have the buildings on it, or, you know,
Into a conservation development, for example?
in conservation development, or even if you have a 2-acre parcel, that's just not the area where you would want to build anyway. The real problem that this slopes law created, and it's been documented by a number of other people, is that we are under enormous MS4 pressure. The state is under pressure from EPA to upgrade the MS4 constantly. And Massachusetts...
Can you just say for the record what MS4 is?
Yeah, it's the requirement that EPA gives to the state for separate separate stormwater sewer systems. In other words, we don't mix our stormwater with our wastewater, as some cities do, like Providence. Instead, we handle them separately through our, culverts, discharge pipes, catch basins, etc. So all the entities, including the Rhode Island Department of Transportation, that have MS4 permits are required to meet certain specifications. We have to have a plan in place to address bodies of water that don't meet minimum requirements. And in Massachusetts, 2.5 years ago, they've already gone to their next level of MS4 requirement. And some of these small towns in Massachusetts have been required to do remedial actions costing hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that's what's going to happen if you allow indiscriminate disturbance of steep slopes. We're seeing this even in Marshfield Commons, even in a very small area. But the bottom line is, you're going to have to find a balance between what you want to encourage people to do and what you absolutely require. You cannot require it to be in open space. But again, this is not unusual in the sense that the comprehensive plan, pushed us in this direction. This is a direct response to the comprehensive plan of 2006. And that's where it came from. So we've got to find a way to deal with the things that really count and not with the things that don't count. My main concern is protecting steep slopes from disturbance to the extent possible without violating people's property rights. Question?
Mrs. Zelinski?
Addressed to the solicitor. Ms. Lombardi, in this letter from the attorney, She quotes section 17.8.1 site planning. She says state law was passed. Are you familiar with that state law that was passed? Do we have a copy of that? In essence, we verifying what she's saying?
I agree that the slopes law addresses the issue of whether you can exclude slopes above 15% from the area calculated to meet minimum lot requirements for any given zone.
Okay.
It doesn't go beyond that. It doesn't say, once you do that, you can't require, taking measures to avoid building on that section of your land. You can count it. I think that's I don't have any problem with the slope law, as long as it's correctly interpreted. Basically because there are sites that are gonna have slopes on them that still have a lot of good land to develop. In cases where you get nothing but slopes, then you got a developer who could sell a big approach.
I had some questions. Mr. Erickson, off of your, the copy dated 9/16/13, I'm glad that, we discussed incorporating that basically, yes, we could have a development review committee, but the authority still vested in lies with planning board. So that was addressed on 17.2. On page 17.13, section 17.8.2, groundwater resource protection. Water disposal. Parcels connected to this sewer system will be required to follow the sewer commission's regulations, lots requiring individual sewage disposal systems.
That should be spelled out.
Okay, yeah, can you, thanks.
Page again, I'm sorry, Paul.
17-13. It's on site, there's water treatment systems. You got it, Bob?
Thank you. Yes.
Okay, on 17-20, on page 27. Figure 29, examples of overhead lighting and fixtures, label examples to be removed. Why, we're gonna move the examples? Is that just kind of boxing into that type of lighting fixture?
Well, most people I've talked to find that first example on a tractor, and there's really no need to
The
describe it.
Midwest type, light, you talking about the first one, the
Yeah,
Midwest look?
I mean, physically looks like it doesn't belong anyway.
Beauty's in the eye of the beholder. Okay, so.
I haven't bought a beholder yet.
It's certain
Talking about the one that
cultures-
looks like a chess piece? Is that the
Well,
one
I
you're talking about?
refer to it as a Midwest type thing. Yeah,
That's a castle in chess.
Yeah, okay.
okay.
I kind of like it. I'm a contrarian anyway.
Bellevue Avenue kind of light.
It's ornate, Okay, and you addressed 1734. There was, I think that's about it. Oh, just a minor housekeeping thing. Page 37, section 1712. Yes, you strike the 2 and put 0 in there. Got it. Now it's self-explanatory. I got it. Thanks.
Any other questions from the council? This is,
If I may.
please.
So, do we need to clean up the language in 17.8.1 at the bottom of 17.6 so that we can avoid, you explained it rather well, and we understand it, but I think we understand it anyway. But 10 years from now, when the council's changed and you may or may not be here, maybe you're retired.
Council will change?
Oh, yeah, it's gonna change for sure for the next time. Well, at least one member, I speak for myself. So can you, should we make this language a little easier
Yes.
for those that follow us
Yes.
to understand?
And I hope we have a good debate tonight about how it should be changed. I know there's a couple people that have good thoughts about it. And then when we have the debate and discussion, we can figure out what the language should be. I think minimally, we should take the term maximum extent practical to put it in the paragraph directly before that list. And the list, I think, should be significantly shorter than this one.
You've worked with the planning board on this, correct? You've had their input?
Yeah, but I went through the whole shall and should, and for some reason I was overwhelmed by the to the maximum extent practicable, and I did pick it up the same way that the attorney for Reba did, and they actually didn't discuss that area, and I think it's a valid point.
I'm not home.
Sorry. Go ahead, I'm turned off.
When it goes off, I say it's
Okay, but planning board did weigh in on this spot, right? You had-
Yeah, and nobody else picked that up either. I gotta say, I was overwhelmed by the maximum extent practical, because that to me is a modifier that pretty much takes the shall out of shall. But, I don't like the list either.
Okay.
I guess the question will be, we'll have this discussion after we have full public
Right.
input, but the suggested changes to the language, as well as you had mentioned on that list of 8, I think at least 2 of them were already accounted for in other provisions, so they don't need to be there.
Yes. Right. And remember, I mean, it was only recently that we did the protection for the water supply and the SWIP.
So this is a public hearing, and I would, unless there's any other questions from the council, I would invite anybody to step forward, state the name for the record, and share your thoughts. Mr. Heeman.
Good evening. My name is George Heeman, 18 Eaton Street. For the record, I had no intention of coming here this evening, but with this item on the agenda, in my current position, I feel compelled to at least say something in general. I'm speaking to you from the position of the chairman of the Rhode Island Society of Service Board of Retired Executives. For the record, we are a resource partner of the Small Business Association, and we provide counseling, mentoring for people who are in small businesses or want to start a small business. That's essentially where I'm coming from this evening. We are bound, I'm going to talk with you a little bit about some client experiences and actions in the state of Rhode Island and West Smithfield in particular. But in advance, I'll tell you that we are bound by non-disclosure agreements, so that what I say is very, very, very controlled and limited. Okay? I'd like to talk about first 2 clients. One client is looking at a capital plan, small business plan, that required at least $100,000 in startup funds, not including land and buildings. Strictly business property. We worked through their entire business plan, came up with an excellent plan, nice clean business, projected employment of 10 employees, small. They explored locating their businesses. They looked at North Smithfield, Smithfield, and Lincoln. They decided that they wouldn't even attempt to locate in North Smithfield because of the zoning and rigid occupancy restrictions and enforcement in this town, historic.
Could you say that again? Because of?
The rigid description of occupancies and enforcement of those descriptions. That's where they're coming from. Okay? It was that issue, and that really stopped them from West Smithfield, Lincoln, and Smithfield welcomed them with open arms. The point here that I'm going to make is that this client was a resident of North Smithfield. That's a slap in the face, as far as I'm concerned. We had another client in a similar position, with a good capital plan, the occupancy, again, the occupancy zoning in North Smithfield, essentially prohibited them from opening their business here. They located very, very successfully in Smithfield, welcoming with open arms. So there's 2. That small business, we're talking about about 2 to 5 employees. Small, but these are the people who pay taxes. Another client was in business in North Smithfield, just beginning some business, came to us, asking us to help them establish their business, do it properly. And we went through the steps, to register with the local town, and all 9 years. Make a long story short, that person decided to register their business in another town and remove the business property, the tangible property located in that other town, primarily because of our high tangible property tax rate as compared to other cities and towns in the area, and a lack of any provision in there for flexibility or exemptions for small businesses. Give a break on an exemption. So those, and that again is a resident of North Smithfield, long-term resident of North Smithfield. So here we are, one town, among many, in the state of Rhode Island, in Providence Plantations, which is ranked nationwide as either 49th or 50th in being tax and business friendly. My only point, the only thing I'd ask you to do is to think very carefully before further encumbering business development in this town. Whether this particular ordinance does that is up to you to decide. But please do think about small businesses and try to make North Smithfield at least the best of the worst in the nation. As Rhode Island is not the worst. So I try to be the best in our claim. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Heaton.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to get some clarification on the use of the term rigid occupancies. Is he referring to uses, or what occupants can do in those buildings? That's usually not the way it's interpreted. You go to the zoning officer and get a certificate of occupancy, and it says this, and this use, and he writes back and says all of these uses are permitted, or this one needs to go for a variance. I'm just not sure what that comment meant, but it seemed to me to be a good one. I just don't know exactly what he meant.
Mr. Heaton, just to clarify.
The comment meant that the person, the client tried to get a variance and was absolutely unsuccessful.
Good evening, Mr. President, members of the council. My name is Lucian Benoit, 28 Ridge Hill Road. And as a member of the Economic Development Committee, I take great exception to several proposals in the Section 17 update before you. It is notable and unfortunate that we in North Smithfield do not have a Director of Economic Development, as our sister communities of Burrowville and Smithfield have, to champion and welcome the expansion of private business. Ironically, I have been accused by the planner and the administrator of being anti-business, simply because I dared question an applicant for the planning board in regard to lead and arsenic in the soil. That made me anti-business, because I dared question. Yet, these same people support the ideology of a few anti-business, anti-development bureaucrats and nonprofit executives trying to build their resumes on the shoulders of our taxpayers. Let's start with the fact that all of Section 17 specifically applies to commercial and business developments and exempts single-family residential. The site plan review required with the 8 numbered items are very objectionable in my point of view from the economic standpoint. On the specific areas to be preserved, focus on 3, 4, 7, and 8 on pages 17-7. The trees are the exclusive property of the landowner. Tree harvesting is encouraged and regulated by the Forestry Division of DEM. Especially ridiculous is item 4. We in Rhode Island do not have flat prairie land. We have hills. And to declare land with a slope of 15% or greater as unbuildable is not only absurd, but likely unconstitutional and equivalent to a taking without just compensation. Visualize, if you will, a slope rising 1.8 inches per foot over a 10-foot length. 18-inch rise makes this land unsuitable for building. How absurd. If enacted, this ordinance would condemn North Smithfield to a bedroom community without any additional non-residential tax base. If we want to preserve vistas, old fields, and forest land, do it with just compensation to the owner, not by confiscation and condemnation. Now be aware that the folks behind proposals like this will quickly call for adjusting the number as a compromise. I bet you think you've come out ahead. Instead of 15, oh, we'll go to 30. And that's supposed to appease you. Don't fall for it. You'll be delinquent in your fiduciary duty and obligation to our taxpayers. Putting it another way, the National Market site on Providence Pike could not be constructed under these regulations, nor could most of the businesses along Industrial Highway. Think of the very successful Highland Industrial and Office Park in Woonsocket and the hilly, rolling land upon which it is built. Such a venture would never be possible in North Smithfield, much to the delight of a few special interest and anti-business individuals. One other bone of contention I have is the restriction of structures on ridge lines and hilltops. The Amica building in Lincoln, with its beautifully landscaped grounds, sits on a hilltop. It would forever be taboo in North Smithfield. Another hospice building would also be a no-no. New cell towers and private small or medium-scale wind turbines could not be constructed. However, someone could build a 2.5-story house on any of these hilltops and cut as many trees as he wanted, because Section 17 only discriminates against commercial and industrial proposals. I still find minor typos, grammatical errors. For example, on page 17-8, figure 2, there is mention of solar irradiation, which means to render something sterile. It should be solar radiation. Surely you don't want to affix your signatures on a document with grade school letters. The recent changes in the use tables and the aquifer protection overlay have already shrunk the areas where businesses could have been established. We cannot afford to bring that acreage to zero. Statewide economic planning has identified the 146 corridor in North Smithfield as a prime area for commercial and industrial development due to excellent highway connectivity between Providence and Worcester. This ordinance slammed the door shut on potential business investment and employment. The future generations in our town would be far better served if we put out a huge welcome mat. Lastly, let me suggest that a properly engineered and executed plan, such as demonstrated by the terracing at Anchor Subaru, is a model of land use to be duplicated, not shunned. Please do not vote to adopt this as written. Business is the lifeblood of a community for employment and a sound tax base. This is totally anti-business. Thank you for your attention. I hope you can hear me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I have a couple of comments. One is that the Anchor Subaru Nissan was a good example of what you can do within the existing regulations. The terracing was there, they enhanced it. They're going to come in with even more development at the top of the hill. And we were able to get their plan through in 60 days, where the state would have allowed 360 days. So in reference to what Leslie said, I think the ability to make expeditious and accurate decisions is part of this process. I do want to note the comment made as a reference to the Navigant Credit Union, which was a remediate remediated site, or will be remediated, for materials left in the top 2 feet of the soil by the previous greenhouse user when they used pesticides. So that was a remediation plan that was done by VHB, one of the best engineering firms, approved by Lydom, thoroughly vetted before the planning board. The issue was not that there was something wrong with the plan. It was that the chairman asked for an extra step to come back before the board that was inconsistent with state law, and the town solicitor had it done as a direct signature. The chairman refused to sign, and the secretary was also eligible to sign, did so under state law. That was the issue that raised the concerns, but it was not our wanting to in any way avoid a thorough review of the remediation plan. He also raised the question in the meeting with the town solicitor and I that they didn't submit a raw, and it was therefore an incomplete plan. That's like a RAW is a remedial action work permit.
Can I interrupt you?
Yeah.
Just, I don't want to get too far
Okay.
afield on that issue because
Right.
it's not pertinent to us before us.
In every other way, I agree with the concept. I think what we should do is find a way of preserving what needs to be preserved, because if you don't do it, it's going to be very expensive without putting the burden on some of the people who, obviously would be better off without those burdens.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
One of the comments that Mr. Benoit raised about under these regulations, development along Industrial Drive couldn't happen. And so I'm curious your take on that, because my understanding from this is that the purpose of this is to encourage, to the extent practicable or should, or to use the land that's being developed according to these guidelines. But it wouldn't deem that property to be unbuildable. Is that your understanding? I want to make sure.
I am totally confused by that, because as you know, we have just had a 2-phase subdivision with a brand new building on it, where you have the German firm, and there's one next to it that can be developed, and there are 3 lots in back that have been approved and could be developed. We had always assumed, even at that time, that this was in effect. So it certainly didn't stop a very good project from being done. I am just totally confused by what he meant.
Is there anybody else who would like to speak on Mr. Zosky?
President, members of the council, thank you for the time. Gary Zosky, 88 North Main Street. Unlike Mr. Heeman, I don't come in my role as the chair of the SBA Economic Summit Regulations Subcommittee, nor my role as the Rhode Island member of the SBA Regulatory Fairness Board. But I mention those things because I am intensely involved with the regulatory process in Rhode Island. I have great concern for it, and I'm beginning to become more involved in the national circumstance. Before getting into the specifics of this ordinance that I find offensive, I think it is equally so that we're sitting here with 3 people eliciting concern over an ordinance that some at least see, and I am one of them, where the town's proposing to actually take land. And in the days going by when folks like Joe Nato and Mike Holtzman and John Hill were always around to make sure that things were on the front page of the different papers, we did have people in the room. But the lack of action by local newspapers does not excuse any public body from making sure that citizens have a voice and have been heard. I wasn't aware that this was an issue to the point that I wasn't here for the first hearing, but I am here now. The very circumstance that the Rhode Island Builders Association only responded to you today at 3:30 is only because they learned about this on Saturday afternoon. And again, those circumstances are intolerable as to our process, and we need to think about that in a big way. MS4s, you know, I've said it before in this room, I'll keep saying it, I hope someone starts to listen. You know, if the room in this air stinks, telling the next person to come in the door to fix it is not going to work. If we have a runoff problem today that needs to be addressed, then we're responsible for that. We can't just pass it on to make it be fixed by the next person that builds a commercial or a residential structure. This is just very different. I want to also go back to, you know, maybe just some simple stuff. And Leslie talked about the number of regulations, the number of pages in regulations that she's weeding through to try to fix. When I was able to download this proposal or print this proposal, and it came out as the 34 pages that it is, I went to the town's website to see what section 17 is now. Here it is, it's 6 pages. We're adding to the complexity that Leslie is trying to fix, and we need to stop that too. I agree with the intent of the first page of this proposal, and I think it's, for the sake of brevity, that's it. There's intent to encourage sensible development of land, but it is not for you, me, or anyone else to be telling you or exactly where to be planting trees and to talk about, I mean, this slopes thing, I mean, what kind of nerve do we have when we've heard the state discussion and the state has said, the leadership of the state has said, no, we're going to find a way to kind of curve around it and say, well, we're not cutting it out of the discussion, out of the lot calculations. We're just going to maintain that it has to be open space. We're going down roads, folks, that if it doesn't lead us to legal circumstances, it should. I am a landowner in the town. I'm here not to speak as an SBA, but to speak as a resident and as a landowner. This is wrong. We're trying to fix the stink in the room by handing it to the next person that comes up with a problem. And that in itself is what we should be looking at trying to fix. The issue of you know, well, it hasn't been mentioned, start at 17-5, the top of the page. This circumstance where we're requiring a developer, an applicant, I should say, to blank check any whim that our planning board decides to pursue in the way of consulting is another action that I look at and say, really? I mean, does the applicant get to say, I can't afford that? You're going to go out and hire, I don't know, $1,000 in some cases might be too much. $10,000 may be enough, may be okay, but in others, whatever. How do we do that? How do we put stuff in writing to say, go ahead, the planning board is authorized to just go off and do anything it wants to do to start dueling consultants. You know, and I've been a consultant. I am a consultant. I've been on both sides of an issue. We can trust people that come before us if we give them the right tools and the right requirements. That maybe there's a form that we need some folks that we need to develop together to make sure that we're getting good engineering practice and good consulting practice. I wouldn't have a problem with that. But to just tell the developer whatever we want to spend, you're going to pay for it. That's what we say here. I have a real hard time even suggesting that to people. Mr. Erickson talked about a lot of the shells and and so forth. You know, we're looking at some dramatic change here where we input the shall with the environmental impact assessment, with the fiscal impact assessment. It's no longer an option. We're saying it's going to happen. And you know, again, how difficult do we want it to be for any kind of development in our community? This is going off the deep end. The issues with the top of page 7, you know, maybe it's already been said, but when you look at what areas are affected by community wellheads, I mean, you are taking land. You're causing land to be, and some of these things are not accurate. I mean, we've already been through the circumstance, and frankly, I'll say here right now, I am actually working to try to get the groundwater classification in North Smithfield changed because of the action that this council recently took. That it will impede our ability to keep people in our industrial park. All we need to do, folks, and so much of this is another example, all we need to do is make sure that we're enforcing, or that regulations get enforced. Tell people that we are maintaining intense enforcement zones. We don't have to add new layers of regulations. All we need to do is make sure that the regulations that are in place get enforced. And in this case, a lot of it is simply a matter of adopting and emphasizing the need to follow the stormwater design manual. Instead of incorporating pages from that into our zoning ordinance, why are we doing this? We're complicating life in a circumstance with some issues that are going to just make it seem to people that, wait a minute, I'm not going to get involved with the town that's going to tell me that they know where I need to plant trees on my property, and I don't. This whole, again, I guess my first comment is my belief. The first page, the intent, that's fine. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kozowski. Any closing?
I want to go back to the issue of where did this come from. We agreed to start with what had almost been passed in 2006 as a starting point. You should also be aware that this is essentially what's in Berlin, same pictures, same text. So it's not something that has doomed the town somewhere else. It's really a question of where do you find the balance between what people want for this town. And those are the people who come out for comprehensive plan time. Very rarely do you see any economic development coming out for comprehensive plan development. It's just the way the whole social structure works out. And so this came from the comprehensive plan. It's appropriate probably to go back and look at the comprehensive plan to see where we go next time. But I would like to address just two small issues that we raised. One is the idea of having a peer review. In the case of Walgreens, we had peer review for the stormwater management system. In that case, it was our only public improvement that we had jurisdiction over. There were mistakes in it, very obvious mistakes, and we hired Casale Engineering as our peer reviewer, and Bowler Engineering was on the other side. They reached agreement on those, fixing those problems within 1 week. And I monitored back and forth. It's called the reconciliation process. Comment, response, agreement to make changes, new set of plans in PDF, not printed out. Very efficient process. If that had not been done, there was a case that we found that where the store could have been, first floor could have been flooded in a storm where one of the catch basins was blocked. So that's necessary. And I also find that the landscaping plan is usually where the applicants are weakest. They don't recognize the zoning issue of separating commercial and industrial space visually, pick the wrong species. But again, it's very easy to deal with them, and they can come around very quickly. The Navigant, which had an excellent plan, that was probably the weakest area, and we were able to work very quickly to get it rectified. So the question is whether you want to work with what you previously thought you passed, or you want to make significant changes. But as I said, this is basically Berlin's zone.
Okay.
Can I pose a question?
Yes.
Mr. Erickson, earlier, I actually had planning board had comment in this.
Yes.
Under your watch, did this come before planning board for their review?
Yes. Yes. And as I
Dr.
mentioned
Benoit was
before,
part of that review?
well, with any of the vigor he had tonight his concerns with it, because he probably recognizes that it would have a greater impact at the town council than it would with his own planning board.
So for my edification, planning board, the current planning board or previous members of the current board in the past year or two have looked at this and vetted this.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we've had it on the agenda probably 5 or 6 times.
I just wanted it for the record, that's all.
Yeah.
And this is substantively in the same form that it was when the 2006 council thought it passed.
Yes,
There's
yes,
been a few minor changes to it.
right.
It's come before this council on March 4th, May 20th, August 5th, being reintroduced, first reading, public hearing. I guess my question is, how do we get the language changes that we seem, that there seems to be agreement on incorporated into the next reading?
Well, your big issue right now is the list of 8.
Right.
If you want me to give you a shot at revising it so that it might meet your generalized requirements, I can do that.
Based on those that you don't feel need to be in it because they're accounted for
They're
elsewhere.
already accounted for. Since 2006, they've been accounted for.
You know, I have to say, when this came years ago, I had an issue with the amount of trees, where you put the trees, who cuts the trees, where they're cut from. It was, I thought, a little over encompassing. But we did, we thought we had passed it through a technical problem, it wasn't passed. I'm glad to hear that the current planning board has been looking at this, and it's been, they've had their ability to review this, because smarter minds than mine are on that planning board. So in essence, if this is what, and I don't want to see you gentlemen get into it, if I may continue, Mr. Flaherty. Doc, have you guys all looked at this on planning? Basically, yes?
We've looked at it many, many times,
Okay,
and I'm not in agreement with the thing, okay?
all right.
Simple as that. And the vote he mentions, I lost 3-2, okay? And so be it. And it was made very clear that any member of the public could come to this meeting tonight and be heard. That's why I appeared.
Okay.
And just for the record, Mr. Erickson and I do not get along at all. Just for the record, he had refused to meet with me one-on-one in his office. That's where we stand.
I don't think. we
I'll
want
take
to
you
go
guys
there.
out for coffee, maybe we can solve this issue.
No,
No?
thanks.
All right.
I don't think we want to go there. Chairman Glenn knows the environmental conservation work he does. However, I don't agree that you can ignore state law when you're approving plans. So what I think we do is give this another try in that list of 8.
Okay, so there's the list of 8, and then there's the language that intros the list of 8 to the extent
Right.
practicable. Are there other suggestions for how that may be reworded, turning shalls to shall consider or should? Those are the things that I want to sort of get some consensus on so that you have adequate direction to bring us back another version. I don't want to come back to the same thing at the next meeting.
My professional opinion is that we should always take an encouraging approach, a should approach, rather than using shalls except where absolutely necessary, or you've seen a history of abuses. Trees should not be in this unless it is some historic stand that the planning board would pick out, a subdivision plan or something like that. I am a big fan of, harvesting trees. So, I have concerns about that as well. I'm just trying to be the broker for what the town in general wants, and I can tell you, there's probably no more support for this in town than not, and those are the people who come out and comprehensive plans, and that's why you have this now. So I can take a shot and see if we can get it more responsive to the concerns raised tonight, but, it's your choice.
Does anybody have any specific language that they would like to suggest to Mr. Erickson? Or do we feel comfortable with asking him to take a shot at presenting us with language the next time that this is brought forward that he believes strikes that balance?
I think the 17.8.1, if we could clean that up a little, we should.
Okay.
That's what we've discussed this.
Okay. You have sufficient direction from
Yes.
this council? Okay.
Yes. And any other areas that we have discussed that have changed, Does anybody have any problems with those, particularly the one that defines the planning board's role in terms of granting waivers on subdivision regulations that point to zoning? I don't think that should be an issue. Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
So we're on to, it is, just to point out, it's 9:27. We're on to agenda item number 7, discussion by council vote or other action.
If you didn't do anything, are you going to continue this, or?
Yeah, I think we need to continue both the public hearing and the second reading to a date certain, and I would propose that we do it on, we'll either do it on the 7th or the 21st of October. The 21st looks relatively light at this point. Anybody?
So moved for the 21st,
Okay.
Mr. President.
Motion to continue the public hearing and the agenda item to October 21st. Is there a second? I'll second it. Motion's been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion? I guess I'll ask for a roll call vote.
Mr. McGee,
Yes.
Mr. Gasko,
No.
Mrs. Walensky,
Yes.
Mr. Larry,
Yes, so continue to the 21st. Agenda item 7, discussion by council vote or other action on consent agenda. All items in the section are considered in one motion with no separate discussion unless the council so requests. It'll be removed from the agenda, from the consent agenda.
Payment of bills, Mr. President.
Payment of bills. Anything else?
Agenda, Mr. President.
You mean minutes?
Oh, excuse me, minutes.
Minutes?
Yeah, August 5th.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, then is there a motion to accept the remaining items on the consent agenda?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Gasback, is there a second? Second by Mr. McGee, is there any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Now, item 8, discussion by council vote or other action on specific items removed from the consent agenda above. And we'll start with A, the minutes, and Mr. Zulinski.
Mr. President, on page, let's see the page.
Where is it going?
No, I don't see it on here. Did I, am I the only one that's not that agitated here?
I think they got cut off. Oh, I see a 6.
You see a 6?
Yeah?
Well, I can count them, let me count them.
I think that's an 8. Bet you that's a 10.
5th page on the back,
5th page from the back?
no, moving on, 5th page, on the back of the 5th page. It's under planning memo of May 29th, 2013. Do we have that?
Let me see.
You have it?
What does it say at the very top of the page?
It says the 3 past charter review commissions.
Five.
5 in.
1, 2, 3, 4. Thank you. Okay, 5 and
Down the bottom.
3 charter review, yes.
Okay, on the planning memo of May 23rd, 2013,
Yeah.
Mr. Erickson indicated that it was Timmy Benoit who asked to put it on the agenda. I think it was transcribed wrong. It was Lucian Benoit talking about traffic flow on 146.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's Lucian Benoit. That's it for me.
That's on for the 5th.
Yes.
I have a couple of questions. I guess it's on 1, 2, on the 3rd page. Under the public hearing on proposed zoning amendment regarding section 17. Mr. Flaherty explained that this item was on the agenda back in 2006 and it was never passed. And it was supposed to be, intended to be passed. I was going to just have it read, and it was never technically passed as it was intended. And then the next next sentence, the town council back then thought that they were passing it, but apparently, it says apparently none of the Ts were crossed or Is dotted. Small point, I was gonna say some, I don't think it was a question of it being all, but.
Can you just tell me that one more?
Yeah, this was under public hearing on proposed zoning amendment regarding section 17, and it's the second sentence. The town council back then thought they were passing it, but apparently it says none of the Ts were crossed, it should be some of the Ts. It's a little jargonish anyway, but
Apparently some of the Ts are crossed.
some of the Ts. I don't think I wanted to reflect that I thought that nothing was done correctly. And then the next paragraph, I'm sorry, 2 paragraphs down, Mr. Flaherty stated that the reason it showed up is because the document wasn't in the, I don't know what that word is. Codicil, is that correct?
I think it's codification. Codicil is usually part of the legal document, I think they're in the will, but I mean, I think it's codification of the zoning board files.
Okay. And the it should read codification.
I'll acquiesce to the attorney if he wasn't in there. It's too late, right?
These are Pat's as well, I think, right? 'Cause I know she takes
On that.
very, very, very detailed, everything that says is in here. And I think that was it for, let me double check here. One more notes. I don't know if I even need to, yeah, that's all I have for August 5th. So, a motion to
Approve as amended.
approve amended by Mr. Yazbek, is there a second? Second by Mr. Zelinski, is there any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? And then there was minutes of August 19th.
No, we were just moving August 5th.
That was,
Moving on.
We just.
I think it says the 5th and 19th, and September 3rd.
Okay, for technical point, the motion was to move August 5th.
The motion was to move August 5th.
Yeah, so everyone else was accepted.
It's just the 5th? Okay. All right, I think that's fine anyway, because I don't think I have.
However, if we want to revisit it, it's unanimous, can
No.
you do that?
No, I didn't have any corrections anyway for August 19th, so.
Okay, but we could, as long as we can.
And I don't believe I had any for September 3rd either, so I'm fine.
You okay?
Yeah. So we're done with that?
Yep.
And then payment of bills,
Mr. President, I'll abstain because I have a couple of times on the list again.
okay?
Mr. President, did you vote on the remaining items here, or you want to do that?
Yes, I believe that Mr. Zelinski's motion, when he recommended we pull something off the consent agenda, was only for the minutes of August 5th. All the remaining ones were all, although that's part of one primary meeting.
Did you actually vote on the remaining items?
Oh, I don't believe we did.
You did.
Yes, we did. On the consent agenda?
Okay, clerk says we did.
Geez,
So we're on to the payment of bills. Is there a motion to accept the payment of bills as presented and recommended by the finance director?
so moved.
Moved by Mr. Zelinski, is there a second? Seconded by Mr. McGee. Is there any further discussion? All in favor, roll call vote, please.
Mr. McGee?
Yes.
Mr. Zalinski?
Yes.
Mr. Conrady?
Yes, motion carries. We'll sign those. And I'll wait for a moment for Mr. Yazbek to.
Oh, we can start signing.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
John, sometimes on this side, Kim always corrects me.
I'm going to take her job now.
All right.
Okay, so we are on to agenda item number 9, North Smithfield Town Council sitting as the Board of Water Commissioners. The item is discussion by council vote or other action on adoption of water budget and rate for fiscal year 2014. I'll turn it to Finance Director. I know there's been some communication about the balance on the enterprise funds. And I think that is really a good place to start.
Yeah, all I was told by Paula is that you were looking to see how many quarters the figures that I came up with before, and then, something about revenue, I don't know.
The question was, I believe, was whether the revenue received for fiscal year 13 included 4 quarters of billing or 3. And because we weren't sure, because we know 1 quarter was delayed, but we don't know if 1 quarter was delayed the year before too.
No, it wasn't for the year before.
So for 3
But
quarters,
this year, for this fiscal year, 2014, it's out. 2013 included the 4 years.
so there were 4 billing cycles in 2013?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And I did bring, you had asked me,
Yeah, I think the council wanted to just see what the
and I
fund
wasn't
balance.
sure what you were looking for, so I just brought the
What's-
income and loss.
Yeah, what's the fund balance in the water fund, that's all.
Well, the income was 64,700, is that what you were looking for?
No, it would be the fund balance. So you have assets less liabilities, you're gonna have a fund balance.
I don't think I brought this one. I thought you were just looking for that, because I didn't really know the income, so I'll have
Do
to,
you have internet access?
Yes.
Can we table it and ask the finance director if she can look on the website, because I guess it's somewhere there. I can't ever find it when I'm looking for
We
something.
could do that. I think
And then we
if
just know what that
can we
balance.
table it and come back to it? I thought we couldn't come back to it.
Yeah, we
We can?
Sure, we're just gonna take 5 minutes from the social.
Okay. I mean, it's either that or, we've got a few more items here. I mean, if we came back to this, I hate to continue doing this, but I'd rather not waste a lot of time if we can do it on the 7th. If it's not gonna set us back in terms of billing.
but it's not, because the billing's not due.
It doesn't matter.
Is that all you would need, so that
Well,
I can have it for the next meeting and I'll make.
Speaking
sure
for
that I have
myself,
what I
I
need?
wanted to understand better what the fund balance is,
Okay,
because there's been an assertion that the water department has always run in the red, and it's had to get bailed out by the sewer.
okay.
And yet, when I look at the budget, it seems as if the water department is always running at a surplus. So we've answered half that question with understanding about whether it includes 4 quarters, and I just
Okay.
want to understand the fund balance.
And we answered the question about debt service, because that was
Right.
the original.
Right.
Is there anything still with debt service, or you set with?
No, I
Do
think
need
we're fine.
anything
So
for-
now,
Okay,
the fund balance, I mean, the problem is now the fund balance is 15 months old. I don't think you have the fund balance yet for the
No.
end of this fiscal
No,
year.
then
If you do, we'll take it, but at least if we could see the fund balance off of the, they don't call it a balance sheet, because it's a fund
A
accounting,
statement
but
of
it's a
assets.
statement of assets and
Yeah.
liabilities and fund balances, I think.
I think the next few items are things that, I mean,
So you want us to just table it until the 7th? That we want?
continue.
yeah, I'd prefer that, just so that we don't have to.
I'll table to this, I'll make a motion to table to the 7th. Continue this.
Motion by Mr. Yazbek to continue to October 7th, seconded by Mr. Zelinski. Is there any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye, opposed, and that, yes. That brings us to old business, which is item 10B, discussion by council vote or other action on appointments to boards and commissions. I'll just, rather than going through them individually, I'll just ask if there is a nomination for any of the ones listed. Development Agency, Personnel Board, Board of Regional Planning Board. What I was going to recommend on this, as well as one that's coming up for other boards that are showing up for the first time, is perhaps if you could request of the administrator that we some type of advertising, either on the town website or through the Valley Breeze, to indicate the positions that are open, and to the extent that she's able to speak with the chairs of those commissions to understand what backgrounds are most needed. I know that, for example, the sewer commission has said that they would really value somebody that has legal experience. I think they have 2 openings. And if we could understand what those are and get them, Mr. Lombardi does not want that, I can tell. But if we can just get that into some type of an ad or promotion to the website, I think that would be great. So with that, we're on to cover B. We're on to C, discussion by council vote of other action on resolution regarding Slatersville Stone Arch Bridge reconstruction. Ask Mr. Erickson to check in with DOT. I'm sorry, new business B, I skipped ahead. Discussion by council vote of other action on bid resolution regarding capital lease funding. Mr. McDonald.
Okay, we did go out for a bid for the funding for the capital lease. Our financial advisor, Mr. Massaroni, they did the bid. They did send me the recommendations, which I did enclose. And his recommendation is that we accept the bid from TD Equipment with the stipulation that their rate is the same or lower than US Bancorp, because right now their rate is not locked in rate, and US Bancorp is. So I would like to go with their recommendation as well, that we do accept the bid from TD Equipment with that stipulation.
Could you repeat the stipulation that their rate is?
Lower or equal to US Bank.
I did have a question.
Okay, Mr. President.
And this may be more for the solicitor, but I'd like to know if there's a distinction between the lease purchases, which is what this is, right? Capital lease purchase,
Yes.
and regular bonding, because I know that by charter we are limited to $200,000 or less, and I'm trying to understand what the distinction would be from there's a purpose for having that in the charter, and I'm just wondering why that would not apply to capital lease.
Yeah, I think that it's because it's not a bond. It's not a formal bond.
Okay.
Capital lease is basically a borrowing with collateral.
Okay. So if you bonded for purchasing police vehicles, for example, the vehicles themselves would not be collateral.
No,
Right.
it wouldn't.
If there was a bond, well, normally there would be a bond, like to acquire open space, to construct a new school, it's some major item, but, I think a bond is backed up by the full faith and guarantee of the town as a whole. It's not the specific asset. I don't think you'll ever find anything in a bond document that'll say it relates to a specific asset, and if the town defaults, you can have the asset. I don't think you'll find that in any bond documentation that I know of. Whereas in this case, if you have a capital lease, if we don't pay the capital lease, they do come and get the car. If we don't pay the capital lease, they come and get the dump truck, the fire truck, the whatever it is. That's why they won't do anything in regards to like repaving the streets with this one. Because they can't come and repossess the street. And that's what's been explained to me in the past. If anybody wants to differ.
No, and that's logical. I'm trying to understand the rationale for why you would have a ceiling in your charter on the amount you can bond. What would be the purpose of that? Would that be actually I should say that I don't even agree that it shouldn't be in the charter. Or at least it should be, as we've talked about before, it should be tied to something so that it's not, if that were in there over a period of years, as it has been, you get to the point where it doesn't really amount to very much. But I'm just trying to understand the rationale for it being there and whether or not it equally applies to something like a lease purchase.
Coming from the Lincoln Budget Board, it's just an arbitrary limit so that the public can have a say in our financial town meeting. And it was arbitrary back then, it's even more arbitrary now because of inflation. So, I'd also like to point out that the energy conservation bond was not actually a bond in the sense that we had legal counsel, review that. Not a bond in the sense that the charter had. So, it's all over the.
Okay. All right, I don't want to delay us.
But to your point, if we're gonna be doing charter revisions, and you asked for
Yeah.
7 or 8 things, I don't think it would hurt that we talk about capital leases in some type of charter revision, because I think you wanna, if nothing else, protect ourselves from ourselves, in as much as you could get a council here, he could go out
Right.
and capital lease $10 million worth of stuff, and then where are you?
Right.
You know, I think,
Not
I think,
running for office.
well, yeah, exactly, probably, but, that's the point. Maybe we should add a provision for capital leasing, and it should be some kind of percentage of the overall general fund budget, and go that route.
Excellent point.
Okay. So what's the council's pleasure on this item?
Well, based upon the recommendation of the finance director, the town administrator, and our financial experts at Public Financial Management, Inc., Mr. Mascaroni, I make a motion that we award the bid, put a low bid at TD Equipment Finance with the stipulation that their rate be 1.96% or lower. If their rate at the current close is 1.97 or higher, that it be awarded to U.S. Bank Corp.
Motion by Mr. Yazbek, did the clerk get that in entirety? Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Zelinski. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, I'd ask for a roll call vote.
Mr. McGee?
Yes.
Mr. Yazbek?
Yes.
Mr. Zelinski?
Yes.
Mr. Flaherty?
Yes, motion carries. Now on to C, discussion by council vote or other action on resolution regarding the Slatersville Stone Arch Bridge.
Can I ask one other question?
Yes.
There was a resolution attached to that. So there is a water bid, and then there's a second thing, which is resolution, Mr. President.
Oh,
I think they want us to identify once again in resolution form what we approved. Is
Right.
that
Yes.
correct?
just this.
Yes.
All right.
Okay.
So I make a motion that this resolution as presented by the finance director, which reflects the approved capital items that we agreed to earlier in the budget cycle, be approved as presented.
Okay.
GB.
Motion by Mr. Yazbek to accept the resolution as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mrs. Zelinski. Is there any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
You want to make a master, real second now?
I haven't yet.
Okay, see? That's why she's the best clerk in the state.
While this is getting circulated, I'll just go a little background on the bridge. Something we're watching very closely because we know that construction cycles go for only a certain duration, and we just want to make sure that DOT is doing the design work so that it can be put out to bid and done in the next year's construction cycle without having to bleed into the one after that.
Yep.
Mr.
Long
Harrison
story
has had some
short,
contact with DOT.
Fall of 2011, I did the research, and we basically said, why do you have this kludgy old design for a bridge? We went out and found an award-winning one from Kentucky that matched all the specs. It was done in 7 months and went down to DOT. The director held a nice design seminar. We figured, hey, we're going to get this, done right away. A year later, we get a notice that they had actually contracted for 3 competing designs: the kludgy design, an alternate kludgy design, and a pre-stress design. And guess what? The pre-stress won in every category. Like, you wouldn't know that, and needed a year to figure that out. So that's what set us back. And now, with the approvals from the agencies and from the discussions that we had to have 2 meetings about a month apart. It looks like they're not going to be able to build it in spring of 2014 unless we light a fire. So that's it.
So this resolution is intended to light a fire, get DOT to accelerate this, because having it closed for two cycles is going to be very burdensome.
Well, actually, they're planning to do it now in the spring of 2015, have it closed for 1 cycle. But look what we got down there, I mean, we can't keep that going.
No, but if they're gonna stretch it over 2 cycles, I'd rather have them wait.
I agree, I agree.
So, I don't mind going forward with this resolution here, but maybe we gotta follow it up with another resolution. If you can't get it done in 1 cycle in 14, then we want it in 1 cycle of 15.
Right, and they've already said that's the way they want to do it.
All right. But should we do another resolution besides that? Do you think it wouldn't hurt, or you wanna wait and see how this is received?
I mean, I could write a cover letter with it.
Sure.
Cover letter saying that this is our
Can I make it part of the motion?
This is our strong preference. Yeah, okay, make it part of the motion.
Okay. I'll make a motion that the resolution before us be approved as presented, and that the town planner, at the direction of the town council, inform Rhode Island DOT that if they cannot get it done in 1 construction cycle of 14, that it not go over into a construction cycle of 14 and 15, that it be held off, and then completely in a construction cycle of 15.
But to try to word it in a way that we really want it done in 14 in total, because I just caution about giving them some signal that would be okay if it went to 15.
One-way traffic,
Yeah, but I'll leave that to your wordsmithing.
Yep.
So motion by Mr. Yazbak, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. McGee and Mrs. Zelinski, is there any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed, done. On to
Vice town clerk in the statement and everything? Coming.
We've already done item D, and we have item E, discussion by council vote or other action on appointment to historic district commission. Are there any nominations? On to F, discussion by council vote or other action on resignations from town boards and commissions. We have one from the Economic Development Commission, Mr. Schmidt. We have a letter from Mr. Schmidt indicating that his job responsibilities have increased and he can no longer devote the time. And I believe we also had a letter from Mr. Naradowi resigning from the Parks and Rec Commission.
Make a motion that they be received, and that the clerk send out a thank you letter on behalf of the town council for the years of service to the respective commissions or committees.
Including Conservation Commission, which is Ms. Pacheco,
Absolutely.
please. Yes.
If I may.
Yes.
We accept it with regret.
Yes. Motion's been made, it's been seconded by Mr. Zelinski. Is there any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Discussion by council vote or other action on appointment to Parks and Rec Commission. 1 2-year term that expires 12/1/14.
This is an appointment by the town administrator with the town council
Right.
approval.
Okay, Peter.
Is this letter meant to say that she wants to appoint this gentleman?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, she communicated that to you? Okay.
Based upon the recommendation or the appointment by the town administrator of Mr. George Dice, I move that that be confirmed with the town council approval.
Motion by Mr. Yazbek to approve the town administrator's appointment of Mr. George Dice, to the 2-year term that expires on 12/1/2014. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Zelinski. Is there any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Second. All in